Hi everyone, we're about to start Module 4, and I don't know if you feel like I do that the summer is flying by, but it is. We're halfway done at this point, kind of at the halfway mark. So there's two things going on this week. We start to really explore the start of your overall project and how you get into it, and we start looking at communication channels themselves and what we do with them. And your actual discussion question really revolves around how you communicate effectively, not only with clients, which is one aspect that we've touched on before, but also within your project team. Depending upon what kind of project you're operating, you may have project members that are scattered throughout the United States or across the globe. And that's perfectly appropriate. In fact, the use of technology has expanded our capabilities in terms of the type of talent we can tap into to do our projects, complete our projects, have the appropriate talent available to complete our projects. So with that in mind, we've really kind of branched out and moved into a new area of communication. And of course, Web and Web 2.0 technologies have really provided a lot of these. We have asynchronous and synchronous communications. Now, just as a really kind of simple definition for this, synchronous communication is if we sit together in the same place and we chat back and forth, right? So that's synchronous. It's happening at the same time. It's alive. It could also be a synchronous online chat or video chat, right? Where like a Google IM where we're talking in real time back and forth. If you're on Skype and you're talking real time, that's synchronous. Asynchronous is like this. I post a video, you can watch it at your leisure, and then you can respond back to it. The discussion boards are examples of asynchronous communication. We're having an ongoing discussion, however, we both aren't present at the same time. It allows us flexibility, especially when we may have time zone issues associated with our overall communication within the project. So asynchronous allows us to start communicating in a different way, right? Now live communication, I'm sure all of you who've been in an ITV course, which is synchronous, right, can attest to the fact that having those distance components can make it more challenging to communicate effectively. Right? Now for me, on my end, when we do something like ITV, I see little bitty tiny pictures. And on the other end, they may see tiny pictures of me. It's very difficult to catch nuance of body language, facial expressions, even to recognize the person when I see them in person, because on that little screen, I don't see what I can see in person, right? So there are some barriers to communication that we see when we start using synchronous distance and asynchronous communication channels. That doesn't mean they aren't valuable. They're extremely valuable. One of the things I will put out there for you, though, as you start really thinking about the use of synchronous and asynchronous, is that both of them are appropriate at different times. So one of the things you have to really determine is what's appropriate, when is it appropriate, and what kind of combination of the two might be most beneficial to our overall project. So how are we going to combine them in a way that allows us to really utilize everybody appropriately and have open communication channels where things don't fall through the cracks? So this is not one of those things where I can tell you every time A happens, you use synchronous methods of communication, or every time you're in a project that surrounds computer technology, you use asynchronous and synchronous web-based. Every time you're doing a construction project, it all has to be synchronous. I can't tell you that because it varies. Even the same type of project to project, will differ in the kinds of communication channels you need to use. So one of the things that this discussion question is designed for, is to help you do the research to start to understand what kind of tools, both in synchronous and asynchronous, you would have available to you as a project manager, and how those might be most effective and when they might be most useful. Because knowing what you have available to you is really more than half the battle, right? Then it's knowing which is most appropriate, and that really kind of puts you over the edge to make sure that you have good communication. And so, I'll just throw this in there. Asynchronous communication method's the telephone, right? And we all carry around our cell phones now. It's amazing to me I was a late adopter of a cell phone simply because even as a teenager, I hated talking on the phone. I much prefer talking in person. And now, it goes everywhere with me, and I get communications all the time. I still hate talking on the phone. I would prefer not to have phone conversations. I would rather have an email, which is asynchronous, right? Where I can write it out, think it through, I can read what they wrote over and over and get a good idea, versus a phone conversation. I sometimes can't hear as well as I might want. So telephone, I do a lot of business in New York City, and I'm on this phone with people in New York City. Now they talk faster than we do here. They have an accent that is different. And then I've got the problems of my hearing and the static that will occur on these phones, right? It makes it more difficult for me to really catch nuances and always catch every word that comes out of their mouth. But I deal with a lot of people on the other end of the line that want to hear the voice and want to talk. And so I have to overcome my dislike of that particular communication channel because it's the one that's most effective for the clients I work with. So one of the things you have to do is also balance that in the equation. You're all going to have your preferences of communication channels. For many of you that are in Generation Y, it might very well be text. You want to text, and even I'll catch it when I get sent emails from students. They'll text me the email, basically, which is not appropriate, right? It's not effective language and communication, but it's what you're used to and what your preference is. And so if you can't send me a text because you don't know my cell phone number, you're going to send me an email, but you're going to use that same language. You're going to have to overcome your particular preferences, biases to communication channels. You really have to understand what's available and then understand not only what you would prefer, but what your clients prefer, what your project team needs in terms of communication. And this isn't just about the verbal, it's also about the written, right? So for instance, our discussion board is primarily written. I don't think I've seen any of you branch out into video yet, but it's primarily a written asynchronous communication channel. So we write out what we're thinking, and that really takes it to another level because for many of us, writing is not the easiest thing. So we really have to think through how we're communicating that in writing. And so that requires that we edit it, right? We read it, we edit. Did I mean to say that? No, that doesn't sound right. Even when you write it, you should be able to catch some of that nuances. That doesn't communicate my message as effectively as I need to. We communicate or create in projects a lot of different reports, a lot of different both written reports, mathematical reports, Gantt charts, right? So we'll have a lot of charts in there. Timeline communications, delay issues, that often creates paper, and what I'll say is that can either be paper, true paper, or electronic paper. But whichever way in which we're operating, and today I would really say electronic paper is probably the best way to go because that gives you that paper to track long term. Usually a database that's searchable is best for you. And I'll throw out there too, use of a cloud to store it would even be more beneficial because you don't have to worry about all the backup components and security issues associated with your data. That automatically happens in a cloud if you place it there. So we have all this documentation we create. And one of the things we need to do is also be able to communicate through that documentation. If we have a Gantt chart and it has now been readjusted to deal with delays and other things that we've got going on, then one of the things that I need to be able to do is have that Gantt chart filter out to everybody who's a part of the project, and I'm going to need to communicate what now is happening in that Gantt chart to the client. So depending on your client, the Gantt chart itself might be very beneficial. Otherwise, you may need to put that into a more written type of report or have a live conversation, which anytime something's going wrong, budget overflow, time delays, combination thereof, sometimes it could be an issue of something you needed for the project's been back ordered, not available, and it's not really going to delay you in time because you can place an order for something else and you can get something an equivalent price, so it's not going to take you over budget, but it's a different decision that has to be made, and you know there's a new decision that has to be made. So you have to communicate that and help them walk through the process of making a new choice. It could be any combination thereof or things I haven't even mentioned, right? There's a lot of things we could need to communicate. Those kinds of conversations usually need to be synchronous and live, and in a way in which when the customer gets upset, you can manage that and their expectations moving forward more fluidly and more accurately because you can see body language, you get the nuances, you can really capture how they feel about it or are thinking about it moving forward. Now, that's not always possible, so then what's next? What's next that's best for this situation? So think those things through when you're doing this. You know, one of the things that I find interesting about many of the subjects I teach, in fact, almost all of them, fall into the realm of both art and science. And the science of it is the use of the models, the tools, running equations, the mathematical, the metrics, right? Those types of things are about the science of the subject matter, whether it's strategy, human resource management, project management, change management, right? We have these different ways in which we can approach it to really help clarify for us what's going on. That's the science. The art of it is making all of these choices about how you use it, when you use it, how you use it with the nuance of the human element thrown in, right? Because that always changes your dynamics. How you change the way you approach situations based on the nuances of the situation itself. It's the art. Part of that comes from experience, part of it comes from practice, and part of it just comes from often common sense, right? Having some common sense about the situation and your tools. And so you're coupling all your knowledge, the science of what we do, with your understanding of the human element and the nuances of the situation. And then you couple that in with your experience, and all of a sudden you start going in slightly different directions than if you were only using the metrics. So I want you to really think about that, because that is, to me, part of the fascination with what we do, is that things can look completely different from one project to the next, even if they're the same type of project. And it's because of the art of it, not the science, generally speaking. So as you answer your question this week, take that into consideration. Now, your other project due this week is your midterm exam. It's essay. You have a 5-hour window to take it. You can choose when you take it. I would say later in the week would be better instead of earlier, just simply because you'll know more by the end of the week. It's open book, open notes, open discussion board. I would highly recommend you review before you sit down to take it, right? Because you do need to kind of get things in your head. Once you start it, you do have to finish it. So I would recommend that you answer the questions in Word and then copy paste over. That way, if there are any issues with Blackboard itself, you've got all your answers ready to post back in. If you have any problems, let me know immediately through email. Depending on when you take it, I'll be monitoring it. But if the system goes down, try to just go back in. If it won't let you email me, don't panic. We'll just simply boot you back up and you'll be ready to go. But make sure that you've got those questions and your answers in a Word document, because that'll just make it much more smooth and you won't lose anything if anything happens. I don't expect anything to happen, but with technology, that's something you always have to be aware of, the possibility for error. Have a great week. Enjoy your July 4th. I look forward to hearing from you in the discussion boards. If you have any general questions at this point, we're about at the midway. If you need clarification on anything, if you're at a point where you feel like you'd like a little more information about this subject component over here, let me know in the question and concerns forum, and I'll make sure you get an answer for that. Enjoy your week, and I will talk to you in the discussion board.